we appreciate everybody being here on time, so we're going to respect that. And I know we're going to have a great conversation here. Certainly, I don't think it could come at a better time. We've got for all those in the U.S., we've got we had the convention last week, convention this week. There's obviously a lot of division. Part of the discussions, diversity, inclusion, equity, and we're going to put people throw out their opinions. We're going to hopefully share how it can be quantified today and put some evidence behind some of those words. So again, appreciate everybody being here. A couple announcements before you go there. As you can see on the screen in back of me and on the screen in front of you as well. My company is Success Performance Solutions. For those who don't know who I am, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time, but we work with small, medium-sized businesses, helping them recruit faster, hire smarter. We primarily do that through pre-employment and leadership assessment. We also help companies recruit better using basically marketing tools. But that's what we do. And again, you can learn a lot. Many of you I know that are on the call today are familiar with me, but we've also just added an LMS. We have 2,600 online courses too. So if you want to keep up with me, the best way to do that, I'm going to scroll through that, is really to sign up for Googlization Nation. It's free. It's my community. Each week I send out updates about webinars like this. This is the first one we're having this week. We're actually having another one on Thursday. We're finishing up our leadership series on the workforce. It's with Dr. Edward Gordon, and the topic is going to be rebuilding workforce knowledge. Again, critical with the pandemic. The one thing that didn't happen, or actually got worse, although people are looking at the number of people unemployed, we have a huge skill gap. And it only got exacerbated by the pandemic. All the technology I've been talking about for years has accelerated the need for new skills and upgraded skills. Again, we're going to have a great discussion on Thursday, but you're here today. And before we jump in, and I turn the slides back to Solange, remember to go up and register for a copy of my book. And keep posting the questions into the chat. We really appreciate you being here, and we do hope to have a fair amount of time for Q&A, because I think that's the most important part of this. So before I give this back, or did you take it back, Solange? Okay, so Solange took this back to get started. Good, she's one step ahead of me. I'm going to have Solange introduce herself. But I really appreciate being here. Just on my side, I think I was trying to remember, Solange, how we met, but I think you were participated in another panel. I reached out to you. We've had a conversation, and immediately I was impressed by the work you were doing. And then when we sort of connected a few months later, this is maybe 2-3 months ago, the conversation had shifted the conversation to equity and quantifying equity within a community or within a company, and then relating that beyond that. Not only is it the right thing to do and the fair thing to do and the moral thing to do, but you've also been able to relate that back to economic performance. And that is my introduction to you. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and welcome everybody.
Hi, and thank you, Ira. I am delighted to be here and to be speaking to you about this new focus on equity. So I'm a dyed-in-the-wool executive compensation consultant. So when you say the word equity, what that means to me is stock and long-term incentive plans, and I'm retraining myself to think about equity in a different way. And so I have to relearn what equity is, and hopefully everybody on the line doesn't have to relearn something, but can basically learn a new vision or a new lens that we can apply to understand organizations and organization performance. So I'm really excited to be here today, and I have a few slides, and hopefully we'll just have a dialogue about them. We're going to be talking about diversity and equity today, and I know that diversity and equity usually goes alongside with inclusion. And inclusion is really important. It's always important, but we won't be talking about inclusion today. And the reason that we're going to put inclusion to the side is because it's a different type of experience or a different type of attribute that we can measure in the organization that requires that we actually survey the employees, because inclusion is an experience. And this is what I tell my students. You can actually measure diversity without talking to anybody. All you have to do is look around a room or look around an organization. Or if you have I-9 files or employee demographic files, you can actually have the data right there. Inclusion is an experience. You can't look at somebody and know whether or not they're having an experience of inclusion or feeling included. So diversity is really easy to measure. Inclusion is a little more difficult to measure because you have to actually go out and get information from the participants. And sometimes that's hard to do. And equity is this sort of new idea. Trust me, it wasn't around when I was growing up or when I had my first job in an organization. It's this new concept about fairness, right? Equity means, in a sense, fairness. And that's what organizations are beginning to measure and what they need to measure to understand whether or not they are actually treating people the right way or in a fair way. So today we're going to really be focused on diversity and equity, and we're really going to be focusing on ways to measure that. So very smart businessman once said, and I think this is that said, you can't improve what you can't measure. And for me, I'm a big proponent in measuring, and I'm a big proponent in data. So if you don't know me, you know, some of you on the call know who I am, some of you don't. I am a pure data wonk. If you give me data, I am so happy. And diversity and equity can absolutely be measured through data and inform your understanding around the effectiveness of your diversity and equity programs, and also inform your strategies going forward. So put inclusion of DEI just to the side for a minute today, because we're just going to focus on diversity and equity. So I get a lot of questions like, so what? Why should we care, right? And for organizations that are embracing the new business roundtable definition of a corporation, it's no longer purely profit seeking. So the Business Roundtable, about a year ago, in fact, I think we had the anniversary of the Business Roundtable statement a couple of days ago, basically said that organizations shouldn't just be purely profit seeking or only focused on the shareholder as their primary focus, but that they should be looking at other elements of the organization and the community in which that organization performs to understand the true purpose of the organization. So if we embrace that and we say, well, we're not just in business to make money, but we're actually in business to have an impact on our employees, on our vendors, on our community, then you can see that understanding how we treat employees in the workplace has social and ethical issues associated with it. And we want to do the right thing. I mean, I don't think any of us wake up in the morning like Simon Legree and say, oh, who can I, disadvantage today? I think we wake up and we go to work with this aspiration in mind that we want to do well and we want to do the right thing and we want to do work that benefits our community, however you define the community. It could be the people in the workplace, or it could be the people in your town, or it could be the people in the world. So we want to do the right thing because it has social and ethical implications when we treat our employees fairly. And when we do the right thing, we're actually doing the smart thing for business. And I basically put up here a little, I guess I want to say a causal model, something that says these things are related to one another. And if we want to have enhanced organizational outcomes, then we need to focus on our human capital performance and the return on investment on that performance. And we all know that employees do better, perform better when they're engaged and they're productive. And what's the trigger to get people engaged and productive? We need to treat them fairly. And if you think about the fundamental measure for the best place to work surveys, so if you sort of, if you unpack what those best place to work for surveys really focus on, they focus on fairness. Employees feeling like they're being treated well, they're being treated fairly, and they have opportunities. So fundamental to that, the best place to work is this fundamental sense of fairness. So if we treat employees fairly, equitably, they will be engaged and productive. You will get an ROI on the investment that you make in employee programs, and that will drive corporate financial performance ultimately. And companies that do better in society, hopefully, will enhance societal good. So that's sort of how we're thinking about this causal relationship. So I'm going to stop there for a second and basically see if any questions. Ira, do you have anything you want to add here?
No, I think it's going along well. Solange, you might want to, you're in presenter mode, so if you want to focus on just the one slide rather than you're showing that.
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try this again.
Not a huge deal, but. So if there's any other questions, I did put in the chat a question in addition to the other one I was talking about, was how would you define equity? And again, I've been, since Solange sort of triggered this in my thought, and I've started to attend and observe and listen and read a lot of different discussions. It's pretty wide open. A lot of people have different opinions. So until we can agree, we all agree on somewhat of a definition of equity. It's tough to achieve it because we all think we might reach there, or we think that organizations might reach it, but we all have a different vision of what it is. So just curious what everybody what everybody thinks on that. And then certainly where Solange is moving toward this on different types of equity really is opening a rabbit hole. I've been introducing this on quite a few conversations I'm in. I'm probably doing 3 or 4 or 5 interviews a week. Either I'm interviewing somebody or I'm being interviewed. And I keep talking about the different types of equity. And there's always a little bit of silence on the back end because companies realize that they may be working hard and getting diversity, improving diversity, meeting the EEO guidelines, getting there, but there's a lot of way to go, way a long road to go. So I'm going to throw it back to you, unless somebody else has a question.
So let's turn our attention to what we want to measure and what we're thinking about, what we work with our clients in terms of measuring. And somebody just brought this to my attention. First thing is we're actually recording this. So if you have a problem having this being recorded and potentially broadcast, don't say anything, don't turn on your video camera, and I think you'll be fine. And the second is that the slides that I'm sharing with you are proprietary and confidential. They're all stamped with copyright. So if you plan on sharing any of these slides, please make sure that you provide the right attribution. So thank you, David, for bringing this to my attention. So let's get back to what we want to measure. We basically think of equity along some different dimensions. If you are in an organization that has more than 50 employees, you are already providing information to the Department of Labor in your EEO-1 filing. So every year, if you have an organization of more than 50 employees, you have a requirement to submit to the EEO a analysis of the diversity in your organization. And hopefully you're all familiar with that. It basically looks at a bunch of ethnic categories, and it looks at 9 different job levels or job categories. So in a sense, you're already one step closer to understanding equity in the organization. So what we want to understand is how your organization performs along those ethnic and racial categories and those 9 job categories to understand, to basically have a good foundation or to baseline your current performance. And the areas that we want to understand is not only your diverse character, the diversity in your workforce, but we want to understand how you're treating your employees. And when we say that, we mean we want to engender a sense of fairness to the employees. So let me stop there for a second, because I'm not sure I quite explained what how fairness works. And I'm going to sort of move into Professor Wonk mode for a second. But I think this is important because you're going to wonder, well, what does fairness mean? And how do we measure fairness? Fairness is, in the academic community, has actually been studied for about 60 years. And they don't call it fairness, they call it organizational justice. So if you think of fairness and justice being synonymous, what researchers have been studying is this concept of organizational justice. And what we do know is that organizations that have high levels of organizational justice tend to perform better, both from a competitive perspective and also from an absolute profitability perspective. There is a relationship between people feeling that they're being treated with justice and organizations doing well. If we dig into justice, there are actually 4 attributes in organizational justice. And the 2 that are most often studied or researched are procedural justice and distributive justice. Procedural justice measures the perception that the employees have that their organizations are designed to treat them fairly. So when you've got a compensation plan, or you've got a training and development program, or you've got a mobility or an advancement succession planning program, that the employees perceive the design of those plans to be fair, that they have an equal shot of getting bonuses, getting training and development, getting lateral moves or promotions than anybody else or everyone else in the organization. So is the organization designed in a way to provide fair treatment to employees? And that's called procedural justice. The second big justice that's studied a lot is called distributive justice, which is the results of an organization design or a program design. So I can think by reading the program and the eligibility and the way the program works that I might be treated fairly, but if I don't get results that I perceive as being fair, then it may be designed well, but I'm not getting anything distributed to me that feels like it's fair. So we look at things that are distributed to the employees for their perception of value. So procedural justice really is a reflection of the organization design, and distributive justice is really the perception that the employee is the beneficiary of that program design. The third justice that's studied a lot is actually called interpersonal justice. And that I call managerial justice. That's the perception that my boss is treating me well, right? So that boss-subordinate relationship can be measured in terms of the perceived fairness of the way that the employee is being treated by the supervisor, by the boss. And you guys have probably heard this a million times, but people go and work for a company, but they leave their boss. So it's really important to have all of the justices measured in the organization. And the thing about equity, and this is where I think this is sort of a linchpin concept. The thing about equity and measuring equity and communicating your performance against equity is one way of communicating to employees that not only are they designing programs to treat everyone fairly, but they actually are treating everyone fairly. And not just the individual person, you know, Sue in the Dallas office and Mike in the Boston office, but across the board, all employees in the aggregate. And that's why I think it is critical to measure and communicate an organization's performance against this equity concept. Okay, so now we've got foundation. What do we consider equity? Well, we can think about pay equity, which a lot of people have been talking about, and it's on the Democratic platform now to ensure that we achieve pay equity because we've got laws on the books, but we don't actually penalize organizations for not following the law. So pay equity is a big one, and it's gotten a lot of attention. And the EEO-1 pay legislation that was passed by Obama and then got nixed by Trump was the government's attempt to ensure that there was pay equity based on gender, based on race, and based on ethnicity. And that actually went away. Now, some companies, well, I shouldn't say it went away, it just got suspended. Some companies had to actually report on 2017 and 2018 results, but there's no requirement to report on 2019 or beyond results. And even though you don't have to report to the government on the EEO-1 pay, you should be doing it anyway. Understand whether or not your pay practices are biased, to make sure that all ethnic and gender categories and all job categories are treated fairly. And you know that pay is a big discrete element that employees can actually evaluate, right? So pay is really easy to say, oh, I'm getting paid, you know, more or less than the market, or I'm getting paid fairly. And that will go a big way to engender this sense of distributed fairness or distributed justice. And I see that there's a chat in the Zoom chat room about the fourth attribute. I never told you the fourth attribute. I will tell you what the fourth attribute now, what it is now, and it's called informational justice. And informational justice is the perception of by the employee that they are being treated fairly by their peers. And that's the fourth attribute. We don't see a lot of research on informational justice. It hasn't been studied a lot. It doesn't seem like it was really important in the last, 10 years. But I think of informational justice as the measure of inclusion. Because inclusion is, do I feel well and good? Do I feel like I have the freedom to be myself in my workplace? And I think we're going to see a lot more research on informational justice, but very thin in terms of the academic literature, and not sure that the organization, other than changing its culture, can do anything about it. But if we make headway on the equity measurements, I think that will translate into employees being much happier and feeling like they're in the right place. So pay equity, really important to understand whether or not we've got biases in the way that we pay people. And again, we're not saying that you should single out Sue in the Dallas office or whoever I said, Bob in the Boston office. We want to look across the organization in aggregate to basically understand our performance trend. That's pay equity. The other big thing for employees, probably more important than anything else for millennials, is training equity. And employees really look at their opportunities within an organization, whether or not companies invest in training and development and provide employees the opportunity to grow professionally and personally. And training equity is really important. We want to make sure that we are not biased in the way that we offer and deliver training and development. So we can understand what ethnic and gender categories receive the benefit of training investment. Where are our training dollars going? Is it equal across the board, all gender, all genders, I guess, all genders, all ethnic groups, all races, all job categories? And we can understand that, we can monitor that. And just as we know how much we're paying people, that's really easy. That'll be in a payroll system or an HRIS system. Training is the same thing. We know when our employees go to training. We know who are in those training classes, either in, aggregate group classes or employees that are developing and training on their own, and we're reimbursing them for their expense or we're sponsoring them. Training is a company-sponsored activity, and companies will know what they're doing in that area. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. Anybody have any questions before we move on? Ira?
No, I'm good. We're getting some nice comments in the chat, so appreciate that. If anybody have any questions?
A quick question.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, do you ever talk about the CEO to say the average worker ratio? That was a mistypo. Thanks.
Well, when we get a little further on in the slides, we'll be able to look at executive management compared to everybody else in the organization. And I know that the SEC at some point during the, not Sarbanes-Oxley, the Frank Dodd bill, had actually made a requirement to look at the multiple of CEO pay to the average employee, and that also went away without anybody doing anything about it. So there's no requirement to disclose, but good governance say that you should actually look at that and figure out whether or not it makes sense. And I see a question about availability of funds, grants with training equity. It's a really interesting question, and we are actually doing some research right now on all public companies to understand the relationship between training and corporate financial performance. We're doing some special research, but for the last 20 years, this has been studied in the academic literature. And I'm going to reference this now, but I will also send out the link to the study. Bieferman and Bernstein. So write down Bieferman and Bernstein. If you Google it, you'll find an article by Bieferman and Bernstein about the return on investment in training, or the return or the impact of human capital on corporate financial performance. And I'll send out the article because I don't remember the exact name. But Bieferman and Bernstein, and they're both out of Harvard, or at least they were when they wrote this article, did a meta-analysis. So they looked at research, prior research, to understand this relationship between investment in training and corporate financial performance. And they looked at something like 94 studies, and they unequivocally determined that there is a material relationship between training and corporate financial performance. In other words, organizations that invest in training end up doing better financially than organizations that don't. So if you have to think about a limited resource, which we all have to think about in human resources, we have budgets. How do we optimize the return on investment? And probably the first place that you should think about is beefing up your investment in the right kind of training. So I'm not advocating that you just throw training dollars at everybody. You really need to understand what's going to be effective for your organization. But the research shows, and it's supported by quantitative analysis, that training is a driver of economic value creation. So we should think about, seriously think about training, how we're training people. Let's see, how do you provide training equitably with limited grant funds? Right, and I get that. I get that there's some money that you have to spend on people, and then you've got some discretionary. And what the approach to analyzing the equity of training will do is give you insights about where you should be investing money, either based on a job level or based on gender or based on ethnicity. So I can't give you a prescription here. All I can tell you is it's something that you need to think about and analyze to to enhance or to optimize your return on investment in your training dollars? You want to say something?
Yes, this is a fascinating question, so I appreciate it. So I think that, looking at it, putting some numbers to it, if we receive a $100,000 grant to train someone, currently it's sort of random. It's like where we submit a proposal, we want to do customer service training or software training, and we get the grant, and then we distribute it. So one is, are we using those funds for the right training? But the second part is, who are to get this? Is that right? Yeah, there was a little bit of a delay, so sorry.
You're unfrozen, yay.
Yeah, so yeah, you froze up too, so I'm not sure. So part of it is that you have the funds, they get submitted, we select the right training, but then is it distributed to the right people, and is that fair? So even if there's a group of people that get it, or you open it up to everybody, did everybody have access to it? Was everybody prepared? And then this is sort of your next stage, is what happens to the people afterwards? So if you have 50 people that go through this training and 50 people complete it successfully, then what's the opportunity after that? What happens to those 50 people other than they just acquired the skills? So again, I think you're going back to what the initial premise was of, if you don't measure it, you have no idea. And I'm not aware of many organizations measuring this type of thing. So,
yeah, really important. And David, thank you for finding the paper and putting the link in. That's exactly the paper, The Materiality of Human Capital Corporate Financial Performance. And it's a very good meta-analysis. If you like reading academic papers, you're going to love it. So, thank you. Training is a big issue. Probably number 2 after pay. There are lots of people who understand the strategic design around training and how to implement or how to create initiatives around training. I'm not a training person. I'm a data person. I will tell you the results of your training, and I will help give you insights on where you should be spending money, where you should be budgeting for training, based on the type of training and the beneficiary of that training. But I'm not a training design person, and that's a specialized skill that's super valuable, and you should look into it, but look into it with data.
That also raises another interesting question, because as we move toward kind of a renaissance, I guess, of training, where it's not one size fits all, is the training designed in an equitable way? So, you can even go back to access to it. So you can say, oh, we offered it to everybody, but somebody's sitting there with an Ethernet connection and somebody has terrible broadband or no broadband or no device to do it.
And I mean, if you want to get even deeper, we could talk about the inherent biases in the training itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Training materials, like AI has inherent biases because the programmers are white men. And so they inadvertently build in their own biases. It's the same thing with training. Like, there's a whole, and we're not going to get into it, there was a whole controversy about the SATs because they were written in a way to, address the white population and didn't take into consideration the cultural issues of any other ethnicity. So there are biases all over the place that we won't know whether or not we have a bias unless we do the data analytics.
Yeah, I don't want to go down this road because there's other measurements, other inequities that are there. But yesterday I was listening to a broadcast or a webcast, and one of the speakers said even the term microaggression, which is everybody was talking about now, microaggression means that, it's only a little bit of an aggression, but it's not. So even the term microaggression, exhibits some bias in it, or makes light of the bias in it. So
yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole week talking about these kinds of things, but
right.
So let's move on. So we've got a couple more of these areas that you can start measuring in terms of equity. Mobility and advancement. Are all ethnic and gender categories provided the same opportunities for mobility and advancement? And I think that that's really critical today. that we be able to answer that question in our organizations and say, we are offering lateral promotions and job advancement, you know, equitably across the organization to all ethnic, gender, and racial categories, and against all job categories, all levels in the organization. And I think that that's really important because we also know that mobility is really important to the majority of the workforce, which are millennials. So millennials look for essentially two things. Well, three things. They look for purpose, right? Which we can't measure. That's something that's an experience. They look for training and development opportunities, and they look for advancement opportunities. So we should know whether or not we have these unconscious biases around the way we move people in the organization or promote them in the organization. And you won't know until you look at the data. Ira, I know you love this one, velocity. Velocity, it's not just about whether or not you're offering promotional opportunities or lateral opportunities or training opportunities. It's whether or not you're offering all races, all genders, all ethnic groups the same rate of promotion. So you might be promoting 10% of your, Black male population, and that's great. And you might be promoting 10% of your white male population, fantastic. But the white males get promoted faster than the Black males do. And you need to understand that. You need to understand the rate at which you're providing opportunities to the employee population, because that's their experience of it. And if you want to engender this idea of fairness, you have to treat everybody fairly. You can't just say, oh, we're promoting men instead of promoting women. That's how you basically make a woman check out. I mean, how many commercials have you seen on TV where the woman gets passed over for a promotion, so she goes out and she finds a new job, right? So it's this idea of velocity. And Ira, I know you want to say something about this.
Yeah, no, I think, this is what triggered this whole idea. And again, I'd be interested to hear what other people say. But to me, this is the ultimate goal. I mean, if we're giving equal opportunity to everyone at the same rate, then does everything else fall underneath that? Is that the big umbrella about is velocity the big umbrella?
I don't know. I think velocity is, and it might be, the x-axis and everything else is the y-axis.
Right, because even if you have pay equity, if we achieve pay equity, but people didn't have the same, they didn't advance at the same rate.
Right.
And maybe the cause of that happens to be training equity or a disequity or non-equity within that. But if you have velocity equity, then does everything else get corrected to some degree? Do you have to have all those other things in place to have velocity equity? Another research project, Solange.
I think it's just another measure. I'll tell you a story about a consumer products company that I worked with that was having a big problem. They had, and I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about this because I think it's important. I was called in by the chief talent officer of the organization. And they had a group of people that they call the creatives. And the creatives were their sales, their marketing, and their creative people, right? So they're people who did marketing and branding and product design and packaging, the people that were really creating, the products themselves. And they had about 700 of these people in the organization. And the chief talent officer engaged me because she was having a hard time recruiting people to the organization. They were making job offers to entry-level professionals, and people were turning down their job offers. So she thought it was a comp issue. And so we went down the path of comp, and we found out that, in fact, they're a 90th market level, 90th percentile market payer. So it had nothing to do with pay. which made sense because she was trying to recruit millennials, and millennials are not as sensitive to pay as the baby boomers and the Gen Xers. And so we ruled out that pay was the issue, and we started looking at other things. And one of the things that I looked at was the data associated with time to promotion, with velocity of mobility in the organization. And she was recruiting, they were making job offers to people, and they were turning down the job offers because the organization had a bad brand for entry-level professionals to move, to learn, right? They're paying a lot of money, but people don't want to be in a job where they make a lot of money and they don't get to go anyplace. They don't get to advance their career. So I asked her, what is your time to promotion for an entry-level person in this grade? So they're hiring people into grade 13, right? Their first, exempt level professional grade. And she said, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? Well, I don't know. So I asked for 5 years of data, which was a massive data set. And what I determined was, because they didn't track their employees and their HRIS system, they just had a payroll system. So what I found was, on average, it was taking 21 months for entry-level people to get promoted. And that is too long. That is far too long. That's like a dead end. It's like there was a TV show where the millennials were complaining. One millennial was complaining that she'd been there for 8 weeks and didn't get a promotion yet, right? So 21 months is like death. And what we did is we came up with a solution without disturbing the organization, where we took that level 13 and we broke it into 4 bands. And we moved people every 6 months. So it didn't disturb the rest of the integrity of the organization, but it gave people the sense of movement, of mobility. And we cut down that 21 months to about 6 months. And every 6 months, if people were doing okay, and they didn't even have to do great, we'd move them up a little notch, and we give them a little bit more money, and we'd say, you just got a grade promotion. And it worked. It worked because the perception was, I have mobility. And so that velocity concept, instead of making somebody languish in a job for 21 months, they're in the same job, they're just doing something a little bit different. They get the sense that they've actually moved, they've advanced somehow. And that was so important for the organization.
I think another part of that too is that, and again, this is where the measurement and where people analytics, quantifying everything in HR, which we haven't done human capital, is that if you looked at it and it was deemed to be fair that it did take 21 months to advance. So now we got a psychological benefit to breaking that up in segments. But it also has to do that you can measure if the velocity is fair at 21 months, then it may not be perceived by the group because there's just this distance. It's, I got to be there almost 2 years for that to happen, which goes back to what you were talking about before about the attributes. You can have you can have all the data in the world and justify that if we advance people before they're there for 18 or 21 months, it didn't work out. They failed. There was just too much to learn and to fit into the culture. And then people discard that whole program for the wrong reason. So there's some of these things has to do with more of a behavioral approach of taking, not just relying on the data and again, saying we're doing everything right. It goes back to what diversity has become, is that, well, we meet all the EEO guidelines. Great.
Yeah. And again, it's about perception, right? This is the perfect place to say perception is reality. It really is about that perception, because in that example, we didn't change the structure of the organization. I mean, there were 20,000 people in that organization. We didn't want to go and say, okay, we've got to redo all of our, salary structures and our grading system. We found a solution that works within the existing system, and we gave employees the perception of advancement, right? We didn't actually have to create new jobs. They actually did get, we said you're a 13D, then a 13C, then a 13B, then a 13A. So they knew that they were on progression and on a rung. And once they got to 13A, then they can go to 14. That was the next progression.
That almost goes back to the basics of where we're headed with performance management, that you can't wait till the end of the year to tell everybody how they're doing. So if everybody knows up front, if the expectation is it could take you up to 24 months to get a promotion, but every 6 months we're going to give you, there's going to be stage. Here's the milestones that you can reach that you know you're progressing. So it really becomes a performance management solution or methodology, which goes back to you just can't hold people in a bay, you know, in silence and expect them that that they're okay with it. I know you got a couple more equity here, and I think the attrition equity is really interesting because again, I'm not aware of anybody measuring that. So.
Well, a lot of organizations are actually measuring attrition, so they know
measuring attrition, right? But I'm not sure on the equity.
They're not measuring who's leaving the organization. So I always say that, you know, a lot of companies say to me, oh, we really can't understand our attrition because we don't do exit interviews and we don't really, you know, everybody always says it's a pay. We don't trust what people are saying when they're leaving. And that's fine, but you can actually understand the nature of your attrition, the quality of the demographics of your attrition. And I always say, look at your attrition not only through that lens of who's leaving you in terms of age, gender, nationality, race, but look at where the attrition is coming from. Is it coming from one department? Is it coming from one manager? I had this at Benfield. We had a lot of attrition and it all came from one manager. And until somebody dug down into the data, it was me, we just said it was IT. Like all the prior HR people said, oh, it's IT. We know that we have a lot of attrition in IT. It's just the nature of the game. And I said, no, that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Let's look at what part of IT that came from, what group in IT, what manager in IT. And we found I hate to say this, we found our predator.
Yeah, when I was at the hospital, we did, and it was a combination of managers. But we looked at first shift and second shift. Because first shift had lower turnover, still not good, but it was lower. Third shift actually was pretty good because there are people that wanted to work third shift. It was that second shift. It was that 3 to 11 at the time. And we isolated and we did think that it was, everybody said, well, it's second shift, which is bad. Well, there were some departments that didn't have it within the same department, like a different unit within that, which then traced back to the manager, but then it also traced back to which maybe that's thinking back why this fascinated me. It also had to do with maybe the velocity of opportunity, because there were people in one shift that seemed to get more opportunities than people in the other shift, which fell back to the manager. It wasn't necessarily bad management, but the manager didn't want to see, he didn't offer promotions because he didn't want to see the people go.
Right.
It was sort of reverse. It's like, I really, really like you. And he would give these incremental and pats on the back. So he was doing everything right from that standpoint, but they wanted to advance.
Right.
And he didn't want to see him go. So he never recommended him for promotion.
So I like you so much, I'm going to suffocate your career.
Right. Right.
Doesn't make sense. And a lot of managers do that. They don't want to lose their good employees. Okay. So something to think about. The last one that we've got here is recruitment. And I know that there are a lot of ATS systems. I know that there's a lot of attention being given now to creating balanced slates of candidates. And I think that's great. And one of the things that we need to also think about when we put together slates of candidates, other than racial, gender, and ethnic diversity, is also to reflect the composition of the available labor market. So a lot of people don't think about this. Like my chief technology officer lives in Brainerd, Minnesota. And, you know, if we wanted to have perfect racial balance, then he would have to have Native Americans and Alaskans working in his company. But the population there isn't representative to have every organization have a Native Alaskan or a Native, American working in their organization. So you need to have your recruitment strategy reflect your labor pool. Now, that brings up a really interesting question, which is our definition of available labor pool shifting because of COVID? Because we are working remotely now, and we can hire people that are not in our geographic location to work from home or work remotely or work technology enabled. And I think that that's an interesting question that organizations need to think about, which is how do I define my available labor pool? And, that's something that you should be measuring.
Yeah, and that's going to change. Obviously, the geographic limitations has changed or dissolved. Maybe there aren't any, but the labor market's disproportionately impacted minorities,
Right.
and especially Black women, but a lot of the minorities. So then you get back to, we have this large labor pool and we want to be more diverse and more inclusive and do what's right, but then how do we reach them? Because a lot of them don't have the same access, the same transportation, the same abilities. Maybe they can't work from home. But again, without data, we're just guessing. We're back to 1970.
How do you know? And you do bring up a good point. This is, we make these broad, generalized statements, but every industry is different. Every work category is different. So again, this is not prescriptive. This is just to get you guys thinking about how to look at your organization through a different type of lens. I put up the slide, the data requirements. So, there is no magic to this. This is not a black box that I'm saying, oh, come to my company and I can solve these problems for you. You can do this. You guys are all smart people. You need to think about how you're collecting data. So as I mentioned at the top of this, diversity, this is the EEO1 categories. 1.1 and 1.2 are executives and first level managers. And then you see professionals, technicians, sales workers. These are the 9 categories. We're not asking you to create new job categories, create new ways of analyzing data. This is what you should be doing every year. You should already have every job categorized into one of these EEO1 categories. And it's just a matter of pulling the data, mining the data. So we do this for diversity already, Hispanic or Latino, male and female, number of employees by all of these categories against the job levels. Great, you've already got a model. Now expand that. Collect information on average pay for each one of these boxes. Collect information on how many moves, how many lateral moves, how many promotions were made in each one of these categories. And I'm suggesting that you actually mine this data every month. And if you don't want to do that, mine it every quarter. Put quarterly numbers in there, but give yourself a baseline to understand where you are performing well and where you're not treating all employees equitably, fairly. Terminations, you can chart this out month by month for which, for your terminations, both regrettable and involuntary, right? So you can look at the people that are voluntarily leaving you and have a picture that way. And you can also look at whether or not you're biased in the people that you're actively firing. So you should understand that. And again, it's just a matter of putting a number in the box that corresponds to each one of these levels and each one of these ethnic categories every month. The number of applicants, if you've got an applicant tracking system, it will tell you, most of the online systems, you have to check the box, what race, what gender, right? And sometimes they say, decline to answer. That's okay too, right? You can't force people to give you information, but if you have information, you should be looking at it. You can look at, how many candidates you're interviewing. Your ATS system should be able to, just spit out a report on the variables that you want to look at. How many offers are made and how many offers are accepted. Using this lens, this Hispanic, Latino, male, female, Native Hawaiian, African American, white, right? This is just the EEOC giving us a pattern to do it. Now, I said I wasn't going to encourage you guys to call HC Moneyball, but I do want to show you that we could take all this data in. So you give us the data, and then we provide a platform for you to drag and drop to understand your performance. So here's a picture, just by dragging and dropping, average salaries, right? So you can see the trends in average male mid-level management salary against average Black female mid-management salary, so you can understand over time what's going on. And then what we did is we basically superimposed HCROI, the return on investment in human capital spend, to show that there may be a relationship, right? So what we're seeing is, as you have more pay equity in the organization, your HCROI is stabilizing, right? And I don't know, I just picked a couple of things. It might be different for you. It might be looking at training and development equity against attrition or against tenure, right? So every organization is going to want to look at different things. What the platform does is it allows you to drag and drop and understand these relationships really quickly once you have the data in the system. So, so there's a question here. For gender, how will you track how employees identify or were born into? So I think now in most organizations you have male, female, and non-binary. I mean, you can't really ask people to disclose information about themselves that they don't want to. And all you can do is work with the data that you have. So again, we're not trying to make people uncomfortable by the questions we ask them. In the last couple of minutes, I just want to go through these last couple of slides. Once we understand our data and our performance over time against these attributes, then we can create a strategy to help either promote to the organization how great we're doing, or to create a strategy to right the wrong. And that's what in HR we should be doing. We should be creating strategies to right the wrong, but you don't know that there's a wrong until you get the data. And then performance in to corporate financial performance, because there has to be a connection. And again, circling back right to the first concept around perceived fairness. Communications is critical. You want to boast about your good performance. Bank of America just issued last November a report on their diversity and equity position, and they are fabulous. They've made this a company initiative, and they work to it, and they let the world know that they're doing a great job. You should be doing the same thing. If you're doing a great job, let your employees know, let the world know. And if you're not, fess up to it and take a commitment, make a commitment to do better. And people respond and respect when you fess up to what's not working and make a commitment to fixing it. And that's basically all I have to share with you guys. And I know we've got just a minute or so left. So I want to thank you all for your running questions. If I didn't get to it, I will actually write to you, because I have the questions in the chat. So if I didn't address it now, I will send you an email and respond. Ira?
And I'm going to put, I think I just put your email. I'm not going to send it to you. I'll send it to everybody. So they can reach out. I think everybody has my emails because you've been getting them about about this event. So you can reach out because some of these are certainly for you, Solange. If anybody's interested in, how do you identify the candidates? We work a lot with that on the recruitment side. Also, taking a step back, we have found in some of the analysis that we did that there were higher dropout rates in the application. Were some of the applications so cumbersome, or were they asking certain questions that groups of people dropped out? So even before, let's look at our applications, let's look who we targeted at, who applied is only part of the story. How many people tried to apply? How many people viewed your job listing and were turned off? They were turned away because they didn't think they had an opportunity. So there's a lot here. And again, data always tells the story. And the data's out there. People just sometimes don't track it. I'm just going to share my screen for a second here, because I know there are some people that are interested in the SHRM credits. So here's the activity number. Should be displaying now. You can mark that down. It's already up there. So you can submit this for one SHRM PDC for anybody's there. Certainly appreciate everybody being on the call today. If there is Actually, we're at 3:02 already, so I don't want to hold up anybody, but do appreciate everybody being here. And as Solange said, she will reach out to you if we didn't answer the question. Certainly reach out to us, and hopefully we'll do this again, Solange. This has been great. As I suspected, there'll be a ton of interest. You know, I've been, again, interviewing a lot of people, and I always bring up the topic of, as you said, I love that velocity equity.
See it because I'm not running.
Yeah. So I basically had that velocity equity, and people really resonated toward that. So
Great. And thank you, everybody, for your patience. Send me questions if you have anything that was unresolved. And again, you know, you don't need to engage a technologist to do this work. You have everything that you need at your fingertips to do the analytics. And if you want some help, we've got a great software solution that will help you do this instantly. So thanks, everybody.
thank you. Take care. Stay safe.